Hello, hello, hello. I think we're live. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Daniel.
And hi, everyone out there. Welcome to our very first Hello Again live stream, live on YouTube. If you can, I just want to test, make sure people can see and hear us. Can someone leave a comment in the chat? Just let us know that this is streaming to where we think it's streaming to, which is my YouTube page and our YouTube channel. Sorry, my Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Yeah, it looks like we've got some people watching. That's great. Just want to make sure someone leaves a comment to let us know. Anyway, let's proceed as if. Yes, there we go. Everyone is saying we can hear you. Great, loud and clear. Beautiful. Well, welcome everybody. I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. And where are you, Dad?
I'm in Hornby Island, British Columbia.
Beautiful. And we're both having very nice days here. And this is our first of what we hope will be a healthy, long series of live streams as we write this next book. As many of you, I'm sure, know, we co-wrote Gabor's last book, The Myth of Normal, which came out almost a year ago. Can you believe it's almost been a year?
September the 13th.
That's right. And that was a whole experience unto itself. But even before we collaborated on that book, we've been working on this project in the form of a workshop called Hello Again for 7 years now.
7 years, yeah.
Yeah. So this book is sort of the second book in the two-book package, and we are really at the starting stages of the actual writing. And we thought that, since most of the material that we've come up with for the book has happened in some ways in public, on stage, in the videos that you might have seen on YouTube, in our workshops, in front of people, when we get up kind of live and discuss this topic, that's where a lot of the best material gets generated, not just between us, but when we interact with people who bring their own situations, their own questions. It sparks new thoughts for us. I've heard you say, Dad, that this is the one topic on which you lecture and give workshops on which you don't consider yourself an expert.
That's right. I mean, everything else, addiction or mind-body health or child development, ADHD. There's a lot of literature on. I've done a lot of studies. I've done a lot of studying of the material, digesting the information, all the scientific literature. On this topic of adult children and their parents, there's virtually no literature. Haven't attended any lectures on it. Haven't read anything about it. In fact, there's very little to read.
Yeah.
So this is material that basically Daniel and I have generated along with participants in the particular workshops. But there's no expertise on this thing. So that part of the excitement of this project for us is that even as we're talking to you today and as we embark upon writing the book, it's an exploration that's fresh for us. So it's almost like we're moving into uncharted territory to try to get the lay of the landscape or the seascape and to see where the winds blow us. We won't know where this ends until it ends,
That's right. Yeah.
which is a bit unlike my other books. I mean, the other books, they were works in progress that they moved along as we created them, but I pretty much had a good sense of where to begin and where to end.
Yeah.
But this one, it's much more up in the air.
And I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, I don't think it's somehow, I don't think it's a coincidence either that there's very little literature on it or that it's so murky and that expertise is lacking. I'd be curious to know what you think, but I see a connection between all those things. As I often say, if you go into any bookstore, you'll find shelves upon shelves on parenting, and you'll find maybe one shelf these days on grieving or mourning your dead or dying parents, and increasingly books about, emancipating yourself from the legacy of your toxic narcissistic parents and or kicking your deadbeat 30-year-old kids out of your basement, but not a book.
Okay.
No, there are some books like that.
Yeah.
Very specialized topics, but less and less rare.
Yeah.
But not one exploring the possibilities and pitfalls of this particular relationship. And I there's just there's something about this particular relationship that makes it very, very difficult to even talk about, never mind give advice on, you know. And for anyone who came here, who's tuning in or looking forward to the book, thinking we'll have the answers, you may want to reorient yourself to the possibility that that's not what's in the offing here. That's not what we have to offer. We may have some suggestions, some guidance, some perspectives that will help you see the thing more clearly, and perhaps, I think, if we do our job, some suggested practices and approaches and whatever. But number one, there is no one size fits all. Everyone's dealing with very different circumstances in here. And
Well,
B, we're a little. I'll just finish. We're a little
yeah.
too we're a little too close to it, and we haven't perfected our own relationship. Whatever perfection means, we continue to learn about it, and the more we learn about it, the more we see it clear. This is my experience. Maybe I'll just speak for me. For me, much more. I mean, you've quoted Krishnamurti, right? The understanding relationship is much more important than any course, than trying to have any prescriptive course of action.
Yeah.
And any advice given without a clear view of the what's so, of the given circumstances, of the status quo, of the way it is bound to be very limited in its effectiveness and its staying power. So for me, in doing this work with you, the thing I find the most valuable is getting new points of view on what's actually already happening. And once I have those new points of view, new possibilities for how to behave and how to even feel and think about the thing kind of emerge in a rather organic way.
Well, for sure, the book will not be how to fix things manual, but I trust it will be is a way for you, whether you're an adult child dealing with parents or a parent dealing with adult child, a way for you to explore and understand the relationship in a new way.
Yeah, wherever you're starting from.
Where are you starting from? Yeah, so that because the reality is that a lot of the pitfalls and the stumbling blocks that have people in trouble is not just what's happening or what's happened in the past, but their relationship and and how they understand it and how they see it.
Your relationship to the relationship.
It's your relationship to the relationship.
And that's really what the book and this workshop is mostly about.
Between Daniel and I, and this happened recently. We went on a wonderful hiking road trip with Daniel and his brother Aaron, my two sons, to Utah and Colorado. And I mean, it was astonishingly beautiful. The sights that we saw, the hikes that we went on, the food we ate, and there was tension. And what happened was that in every single case, once we talked about it, the tension was created by a certain point of view of the other that one of us held.
Mm-hmm.
So that I saw Daniel, for example, as behaving or acting or speaking in a certain way for which I thought I understood.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my understanding that had me upset.
Yeah.
And when I actually listened to Dan's point of view and Dan's experience of it, there's a whole shift of perspective that happened. So
Yeah.
it's that willingness and then the capacity to be curious about something.
Right.
And to say, maybe I don't know what's going on. I think that maybe I don't know might be the theme of this book.
Very much so, which already is a much more vulnerable starting place and a much more fruitful one. I mean, another reason to emphasize your relationship to the relationship rather than trying to troubleshoot the relationship itself is that, as we said, people are going to have very different starting points for this book. Some people, and there's some people who sent in questions, we may get to one, that do not currently have a relationship with that other person. Now, in some cases, both parents are dead. Maybe the adult child is dead. that happens.
Well, let me interrupt.
But don't. Let me just finish. Let me just lay out a few things and tell you where I'm going with it before you interrupt, and then let's see if you need to interrupt.
Okay.
Um, some people are the other person is dead or not around. Some people, their parents are not cognitively with it. Some people have an adult child or a parent who's so far gone in addiction that
Yeah.
the ability to have a regular, any kind of a non-chaotic, stressful relationship is completely compromised, right? And some people are at a distance, and some people really are just clear that their parent is never going to want to talk about this stuff,
Yeah.
so that they can have a pleasant relationship, but they're never going to get into this stuff. So, you and I are not necessarily typical in that our family culture and our particular personalities make it so that talking about this stuff is kind of not so much of a stretch for us. But wherever you're at, you have a relationship to that relationship.
That's what I was going to interrupt with.
Yeah. As we can see, it would have been completely unnecessary for you to interrupt because this is exactly where I was going.
Except, here's the thing. When somebody says, I don't have a relationship,
Yeah.
if there's an emotion inside you, when
Yeah.
you say, I don't have a relationship, that means you have a relationship.
Yeah.
If you had no relationship, there'd be no emotion around it. So there's going to be some sense of loss or some disappointment or some bitterness or some anger or some dejection.
Or
Um,
as one questioner who wrote into us today expressed, some numbness. She said, I don't feel anything about my parents' death.
yeah, well, numbness itself is a is a response to something. When do people numb themselves?
Right.
When do people need numbing? Is when they're in pain.
That's right.
So when you say I'm numb, it means that there's pain underneath that numbing, and
Yeah.
so that there's always a relationship. Now, sometimes there isn't, but as long as there's emotion around it, there's a relationship. And even if you never speak to that person again, that relationship is still affecting you because you're carrying emotions around it.
And you may not experience them as emotions. You may experience them as repetitive thoughts.
Yeah.
Like it just bugs you. You're like, I
Mhm.
don't feel anything about it, but I can't, it just gets on my nerves. It pisses me off. Well, that is an
A
expression
relationship.
that you feel some kind of way about it. And how can it be otherwise? So why don't we, for a little while, get into what makes this relationship so particular and so particularly difficult to navigate and talk about? Because I think it's very easy to underrate and underestimate, but we shouldn't do those things. Just how unique this relationship is, which I think speaks to or gets at why we might be the first or among the first to like kind of delve in. So what is it about this? I mean, we ask in the, and I think one of our early chapters in the book, and it's one of the first things we ask at the workshop, what makes this relationship different than all other relationships?
Well, so again, and I think you're the one who actually first pointed this out. No relationship begins as asymmetrically as this one does. I
Yeah.
mean, pretty much all other relationships, um, certainly as an adult, you choose, on some level, you choose the relationships. This one, nobody chooses. The parent doesn't choose the particular child. The parent may or may not choose to have a child. Very
Yeah.
often they don't. God just comes along. But in many cases, the parents don't want to have kids, but they don't get to choose which kid to have.
Yeah. They choose to have a child in theory,
Yeah,
like in the abstract.
yeah. But there's no, they don't get to select the
There's no
group,
manual. There's no
the,
catalog.
the chromosomes and genes that this child
Yeah.
will carry.
I'll
The
take that
particular,
one.
the particular combination of the mother's and the father's chromosomes that'll begin to number one, number two. So there's no actual. You don't get to see the product before you buy it. That's the first thing. You don't get to
Yeah.
test drive it.
Even
And
in the case of it, even in the case of adoption, where the child has probably already been born, you don't get to see who they're going to become
no,
before you select them.
number one. Number two, this is. I mean, biologically, this is crazily
Well,
unequal.
let's not move on quite yet, because there's a flip side to what you just said,
But go ahead.
which is that so the parent doesn't get to choose which child they're going to have.
Yeah.
The child wasn't around when the choice was made. There was absolutely, this is the farthest thing from informed consent that exists.
The child doesn't
It
even choose. The child doesn't even choose to exist.
doesn't even choose to exist and couldn't have been around to ratify it, to consider both sides. All of a sudden they're brought into the world. Now, we're not saying that's like a bad
Yeah.
thing. Life is a beautiful thing, but you didn't choose to be born, much less to whom you would be born.
Yeah.
And by virtue of the choice, or I guess the parent electing to have the child, that presets for life that this child will now be in relationship with these two people in this unique, indelible way. This is mother, this is father, and so it shall always be.
Mind you, there are some people who hold beliefs that there's a
I know.
soul of the child, and the soul chooses. But
That's very nice.
my mind doesn't go there.
Well, but even if it did, I think I could. I mean, even if you, because I don't want to shit on anyone's beliefs. If that's what you believe,
Yeah.
even so, this version of you, because you
Yeah.
do have to live inside this version of you, even as you reconnect with the larger soul that you are.
Yeah.
This version of you didn't have a say in it, and this version of you is bound by your particular
Yeah.
time and place and qualities and all that. So,
Yeah.
but I'm with you. My mind doesn't go there either. So that's the first thing. Hugely asymmetrical in terms of there's very little choice involved. Very little, because if you think of every other relationship in your life, if you're on a first date, it's because both people chose to be there.
Yeah.
If you're married to someone, there was a lot of choice involved in that. Brother and
Well,
sister, you didn't really have a choice in, but that aside, friends you chose in a large way. And if you have coworkers or a boss, there's an element of choice involved in where you are. Then there's the asymmetricality, or yeah,
well, the,
asymmetry.
bi-
The
well, the, bi-
asymmetry biologically, as you were going to say.
yeah. So in this case, one partner begins as a one-celled organism.
Mhm.
When egg and sperm meet, there's a cell that's formed. That cell then rapidly starts dividing. But what other relationship begins with, on the one hand, one cell, on the other hand, a fully formed human being with 37 trillion cells, which is what an adult is.
Yeah,
So
this is not boy meets girl. This is adult meets zygote
so it's 37 million trillion cells meeting
versus
one
one.
cell,
Yeah,
and well, no, that rapidly develops, of course, and by the time you meet each other, there's a little human being there. But still, even think of the asymmetry between an infant, a baby, and not only that. In the case of the mother and the infant, literally, the one person develops inside the other,
hmm
and could not have developed in any other context.
that's right.
And so that
So it's
already,
mandatory.
yeah, and not to mention that the past history of the parents already affecting the child, already in the womb. So the the direction of influence is so one-sided.
Yeah, the current of
Yeah,
this river is impossibly directional. Like it just goes in one direction. And then you have the directionality of dependence and responsibility, conversely,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So the dependence flows entirely, or at least it should, right? uh, from child to parent, given that biological asymmetry, and the relationship of responsibility starting out at the start of the relationship is completely in the other direction. And
yeah,
then somehow over the next, and it's an open question where we want to place the mile marker of when the child becomes an adult. And I think that's very culturally mandated. In some cultures throughout history, rites of passage around 12, 13, 14 would mark someone as an adult member of the community. But bar mitzvahs are ceremonial these days. I don't think we can actually say that children become adults when they hit teenagehood. Somewhere around 18, 19, 20, 21, whatever, maybe later and later these days. But at some point,
by the way, that's cultural as well, because in other cultures,
of course,
people did achieve adult status earlier.
I know, and you can see it in art and photographs of young people from other eras. They looked more adult. But in any case, at some point between the starting gun, which we'll say is birth, right?
Yeah.
You could say conception, but we'll say birth just for now, just to keep it simple. And then at some other floating point at age 18, 19, 20, whatever, even if it was age 30, at some point in those two and change decades, now you have two adults all of a sudden. But what does it mean to say you have two adults? Because you don't have two adults like you have two adults when there's like a bus driver and a bus passenger, or a boss and an employee, or a husband and a wife, or anything like that. You still have two adults whose origin story is completely and totally stamped by that inequality from the past.
Yeah, and who have so much history.
So much history.
Yeah.
Now, this is where things get interesting for me, because in some ways, Dad, I think this book, if everything else you've written about is true, and I have no reason to think it's not.
Yes, people, everything I've ever written is true.
Yeah, let's just say it is. If it's valid, and it seems to be, I think, to say that who we are as adults, who we take ourselves to be as adults, how our bodies function, how our minds function, how we're connected or not so connected to our true selves, our health, our illness, our afflictions, our addictions, all of our issues. If those things are powerfully mediated, if not determined, by our early childhood experience, and of course, there's plenty of scientific evidence, I think it's pretty uncontroversial to say that's true. Well, then that adds another wrinkle into this question of how is this relationship going to go once both people are adults? Because, well, maybe we can segue now into talking about once we get to be adults, there are special problems in the issues to deal with in this relationship are not the same on both sides. Like for a husband and a wife, there's more of a symmetry. But parents are dealing with things in their relationship with their adult children that adult children are not dealing with in relationship to their parents, and vice versa. Do you want to speak about sort of if you want to speak for all parents in the world, Dad, if you just want to sort of just take the mic and just speak for every parent, what is it like to be the parent of an adult child? What makes that challenging and difficult?
Well, but before we go there, let's just even talk about what is an adult. Because adulthood, in a practical, functional sense, doesn't have to do with a certain age.
That's true.
There's lots of one of my spiritual teachers, Alma, says that there's very few adults in the human species, and by adult he means, and this is important for this book, is somebody who's got the capacity and the willingness to actually reflect on themselves and take responsibility. There's lots of times as so-called adults that have not behaved like an adult. And we even say to each other, don't be such a child, don't be such a baby. And what do we mean by that? We mean that there's no reflection, there's no taking responsibility for one's emotional expressions and one's behavior. No, what is possible, so that's on the one hand, but on the other hand, what is possible is that it is possible for both partners to reflect and to take responsibility.
Yes.
So that possibility exists, and it's that possibility that we're addressing in this book.
Right.
What gets in the way of that is all the backlog of emotions and historical events and hurts and disappointments and failures and guilt. So, but when I speak from a parental point of view, I think there are two major things that get in the way of of a healthy, functional relationship on
I'm
the
just going
part
to
of
turn off my air conditioning. I'll be right back. It's just a little loud.
sure. Should I keep talking? So there are two things in the way of a healthy, functioning relationship from the point of view of the parent. One is um, parental expectation that the child has disappointed somehow. You didn't turn out to be who I thought you'd be, who I was hoping you'd be. And by that time, I don't necessarily mean by that I don't necessarily mean you haven't achieved, or you haven't got a certain degree in college, or you haven't got a certain job. I don't mean that. I mean that you're just not the happy person that I was hoping to raise.
Or you're just not the kind of person I can relate to the way I was hoping to relate to.
That's right.
There's a lot of parents, it's not that the child isn't happy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parents who reject things about who their child is because they don't fit the template of what they understand. I mean,
Yeah.
sexuality would be one kind
Right.
of macro example that's easy to see, right? The child you expected to raise a straight kid, the child is gay, that doesn't fit with your worldview, and so you reject that. But there's all kinds of other shades of that too.
Or you're expected to raise a gay child, and that doesn't happen.
How long do I have to fucking apologize to you, Dad, for not turning out gay? When are you gonna just get over it?
And the other thing that gets in the way is parental guilt,
Yeah.
because whether the parent admits it or not, and even when even when the parent is blaming the adult child, underneath that blaming is very often a sense of guilt,
Right.
that I screwed up. That if I'd been different, if I'd done a different job, if I'd been a different person, if I knew then what I know now, this could have turned out so much better.
Right.
And then the parent is looking at the child through the lens of their own guilt. So then the parent is not seeing the child. The parent is seeing his or her or their own failure as they understand it. Now, nobody, from the child's point of view, nobody wants to be seen as somebody else's failure.
Right.
And that dynamic, as you know, Daniel, has certainly show up in my relationship with my adult kids, and including
Yeah.
with yourself, including with you.
Yeah. And here's what makes that extra complicating. It's not
Yeah.
just that no child wants to be seen as their parent's fault or failure. There's something funny about guilt. And actually, someone asked a question about what to do with guilt.
Yeah.
And it was sort of a general question. So I'll sort of see if I can fold it under this umbrella. There's this is a fine-grained distinction, but I think it's an important one. Words matter. There's a big difference between guilt and remorse.
Yeah.
Now, when you feel remorseful, that's about you. That's about
Yeah.
you. That's about your level of awareness of, you know what, if I'd known then what I'd known now, I would have done it differently. And I didn't. And I regret that.
Yeah.
And that's called being a healthy, moral, awake human being with a conscience and the ability to reflect. I think the ability to reflect comes with the capacity for grief, for regret, for, I wish I hadn't done that. I did, but if I could do it again, I wouldn't. And that's where it ends. Guilt is something different. Now, but guilt is a bit of a con game. I don't mean this literally. It's not deliberate. But guilt on the surface seems to say, I feel so bad about it. I'm better than that. I shouldn't have done it. I wish it hadn't happened. I would do anything to make it different, right? That's what guilt, I think, on the surface wants to say. That should not have happened. I wish it could be different. But like you just said, when you're relating to me through your guilt, for instance, right? Yeah, you're not seeing me.
Yeah.
Well, what are you guilty about? Presumably, the content of your guilt is, I didn't see and hear my child the way he should have been seen and heard when he was a child. I wasn't able to see him. I wasn't able to show up for him. I was selfish. I was self-absorbed, or whatever. Parents have their own versions of this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but these are the kinds of things that parents, regret. But what they don't see is that guilt is, in fact, not a remedy for that old pattern. In many ways, it's a continuation of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you didn't see them as a separate individual, growing, emerging human being with their own potential and their own strengths,
and you still don't.
and you still don't.
Yeah.
And then you wonder why your kids don't want to have anything to do with you, or they would rather keep it to Thanksgiving and Christmas or whatever else it is, whatever else is going on. And I think what parents underestimate, and this is one of the special problems for adult children, is that often the dynamics that were hurtful in the first place,
yeah,
right, that would elicit that remorse or the guilt,
yeah,
some of them haven't stopped.
that's right.
Or they've just changed form. Now, one thing has changed, and this is the confusing part. Time has moved on. There is stubble on my face now. My voice is low. I have an adult's body.
Not only is there stubble, there's gray stubble.
There's gray stubble, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So time and biology would seem to be saying that shit is over. Like that's in the past, right?
Yeah.
Well, technically, yes, but some of the behaviors and dynamics haven't changed. So not everything, and they're sometimes being concealed under new forms like the guilt. But also, again, and this is one of the inevitable or ineluctable implications of your work, I'm carrying in my nervous system the consequences of all that.
Yeah.
Every single day and moment of my life.
Yeah.
And among the hardest moments of my life are going to be when I'm around you, because it was your nervous system that conditioned mine in the first place. I'm not saying that makes you at fault. I'm not saying that makes me better than you. It doesn't grant me more license, more or less responsibility or license to be a jerk, because the fact is, ultimately, like we said at the beginning, it's my relationship to the relationship. It's my relationship to the stress I feel around you that determines how I then respond to it. Right.
Now listen, before you go on, speaking of guilt, let me lay a guilt trip on your mother, because she promised to make me a cup of coffee and she hasn't. Okay,
I'm going to go to the bathroom while you do that, because I don't, guilt trips between you.
I'm joking. Hey, Ray, would you mind making me a cup of coffee? Oh yeah, sure. Thank you. All right, that was easy. Okay.
That was remarkably loving, and that was just a simple request.
It's possible.
Really straight. I would make you that cup of coffee if you asked me that way. So in other words, there's a time warp going on, especially for the adult child when they're around their parent. And I remember you said to me at the end of our Utah road trip, and we had a good week. Yeah. There was some tension, but there was only one fight.
Yeah.
There was only really one explosion, right? On that hike we took in Colorado.
Yeah.
The rest of the time we were just and having my brother there was helpful. It was sort of, he was a calming presence. But at the end of the week, my nervous system was exhausted. And you very kindly, actually, at the hotel said to me, because I said, I don't think I can go out tonight. I think I just need to rest. And you said to me, Daniel, being around me is hard on your nervous system, isn't it? And I said, yeah, it is. And I think that is true for adult children in ways that many adult children are painfully, acutely aware of.
Yeah.
And I think there's many of us who are not so aware of it, and we think there's something wrong with us, or we blame the parent for doing something that's making us feel this way. And what we don't get is that we are working through reels and reels and reels of archival nervous system footage.
Yeah.
That gets, and that the parent's presence. This is the crazy thing. Let's say I was married. I was married at one point. If I'm married, my spouse has the capacity to trigger my deepest wounds. Yes.
Yeah.
Like mom, your wife, and the two of you set off each other's childhood wounding like nobody's business.
Yeah.
Your boss can do that. Your employees can do that. Your friends can do that. A stranger in the supermarket can do that. But when mom sets off your nervous system, like we write about at the beginning of Myth of Normal, she's reminding you of a time that she wasn't there.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was on a different continent. She wasn't even born, actually.
She wasn't even born yet.
She wasn't even born, right? When you set off my nervous system, what are you reminding me of? Not that you set it off, but when being around you sets it off.
Me, yeah.
You're reminding me of you. Now, a different version of you, but
and a different version of you.
And a different version of me, right? But to an infant, there is no time. Everything is now and forever.
That's right.
Your voice sounds pretty much the same. I haven't noticed the incremental passage of the years. So the fact that your face is different, you used to have a beard and be younger and whatever, but we're the same distance apart in years. So it's a hall of mirrors, and it can be very difficult to separate the present from the past, which and we should have said this at the beginning, but I'm glad we're saying it now. The title of the book and the workshop is Hello Again. And then there's a colon, and then there's a very important subtitle, A Fresh Start for Parents and Adult Children. Now, notice what we don't say. It's not a happy ending for parents and adult children. It's not a perfectly healed Hallmark card relationship. It's not some ideal. It's a fresh start. And a fresh start implies A, that it's not bound by what came before, and B, that it's located starting right now in the present, which makes us ask the question, what does it take? What's involved? What has to happen to take this most past-based of relationships, and I think we can confidently say that it is the most past-based relationship in existence between a parent and a child, and bring it into the present moment and update it?
Yeah.
Now, that is not an easy question to answer, and that is why we cannot be experts on it, because it's almost a Zen koan. It's almost too big to get your mind around.
Which takes me back to what we said in the beginning, which is that it really needs to be an exploration.
Exactly.
We really need to be asking what's going on here, what has happened, how has what has happened in the past affected the present moment, and how can we really begin all over again, this time by choice. Like as we said in the beginning, there was no choice in this relationship on either side really, but particularly on the child side. But now we can actually make a decision. We can make a choice to refresh in this relationship and to start all over again as responsible adults. And that may mean clearing a lot of stuff out of the way. In fact, it inevitably will mean that.
Yeah.
But how we relate to it in the present is two people or two sets of people, if you like, willing to take responsibility. What's never going to work on either side, whoever's listening, whether you're a parent or a child, what's never going to work, what's never going to work is, or if only they get it right, if only they clean it up, it's going to be okay.
You know what I thought yesterday? We need to put an advisory on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
Being like, buy this book for your friends, buy it for your coworkers, buy it for yourself. Do not buy it for your parent or your adult child. You're not allowed to give this book to the other one for Christmas.
You can ask them. Yeah. There was something I want to say there, which escapes me at the moment. Doesn't matter. Let's go on. Now, speaking of questions, though, we should be opening up to some questions now that we received.
I think we should.
Yeah.
So let's do that. Well, okay. So we talked about, and folks, thank you for your emails. We will be opening the email address to questions as we do these live streams. Probably best not to send them into us on a rolling basis constantly. We won't be able to get to all of them, but when we have live streams, we'll announce it and we'll be taking questions and we'll get to as many as we can. And at some point on these live streams, it might be nice to bring people on live and work with them live if people are willing to. Probably past participants of our workshops will get priority for that because they've already been exposed to this work, and it'd be great to see how it's, living in people's lives.
Yeah.
Okay. So someone from Germany writes, and I am going to ask this question, let you start to answer it, and I'm going to use the bathroom and I'll be back.
Okay.
How can we parents accompany and help to heal the traumas that we created as parents to our children? What should we do with our guilt feelings? And I know you know nothing about any of that, but I'm going to leave you alone to talk about it. Just make something up.
So let's begin answering that question in reverse. So how can we deal with our guilt feelings? Because until you deal with your guilt feelings, you're not going to be able to help your child. As we said earlier, thank you, the coffee has arrived. As we said earlier, the parent who looks at the adult child through the lens of guilt is not able to help that child because that child does not want to be seen as the parent's failure. And to parents who are feeling that guilt, and believe me, as a parent of adult children who've had their issues, um, I've I've been through a lot of guilt, and especially me because um, for one thing, I'm Jewish, and you've heard the joke about. No, I'm not going to go there. But guilt is certain people no guilt, Catholics no guilt, Jews no guilt. You know, so there's a kind of guilt culture in certain backgrounds more than in others. But that putting that lightly aside, what I ask people who feel guilty about their children is, when in your life did you not feel guilty? When in your life did you not have a sense of guilt? And most people, almost everybody says, I've always felt guilty. In other words, the guilt has been with you since long before you were children. So your original sense of guilt has got nothing to do with what you did to your kids. It has to do with some sense about yourself that you're not quite right. And that sense you developed in childhood. So first of all, separate your sense of guilt from your actions as a parent because it predates it. Number one. Number two, what I ask parents who feel guilty about how they behave to their kids, and again, I've been through a lot of that. And when I was said it, especially me, what I really mean to say was that I've made it my life's work to study child development and the impact of early experience. So if anybody knows where my adult kids' problem originated from, I know it because I've studied it and I've written about it. And let me tell you, it stemmed from stuff that happened in our family when they were small. So that knowledge saddled me with a lot of guilt, but only because I was already feeling guilty about my existence. And the question I ask parents is, what day did you wake up and decide to screw up your kids? When did you wake up? I'm going to hurt my kids. I'm going to harm them. I'm going to make them feel bad. Never. You never woke up and made that decision. Whatever you did it unconsciously. I did it because I wasn't aware of myself. And because I wasn't aware of myself, I couldn't see my kids. But you might as well punish the blind for being blind or the deaf for being deaf. I didn't have the capacity at that time to see and to hear and to know. So there was no decision to do things that hurt our kids. We just did them automatically because we're acting out our own stuff. So, number one, when did you not feel guilty? And number two, when did you decide to do harmful things to your kids? Never. So drop the guilt. Just
Right.
drop the guilt. And as long as you feel guilty, go see a therapist and talk about your guilt. But don't try and help your don't try and help your child, your adult child, from a position of that guilt. Now,
Well, yeah.
now, so that's the first part of the answer is deal with the guilt first. The second thing is the trauma that you caused. Drop that one too. You didn't cause it. There is a book worth people to know about. It's called It Didn't Start With You, or It Didn't Begin With You by Mark Woolen, pointing out that trauma is multi-generational. You didn't cause it. You weren't the cause of it. You were enacting and manifesting dynamics that you yourself were subject to when you were a child.
You were a conveyor belt for it. You never asked to be, but that's just how it works.
Exactly. So it came through you, just like it comes through a conveyor belt, but you didn't cause it. So
Yeah.
drop this idea that you caused it.
Yeah.
Did it come through you? Yes. Had you been more conscious, more aware, could it have been different for your children? Yes, it could have, but you didn't cause it and you're not guilty. So you drop that. Now, if you're asking, How do I help my adult child deal with difficult dynamics for which I was the conveyor belt and which is still affecting them? Ultimately, it's up to them. I mean, it doesn't matter how many conversations, and Daniel could maybe talk about this because in our family, we've talked a lot about what happens to children and what we, my wife Ray and I, how we behaved, how that affected our kids. But Daniel, how helpful was that to you? Just to know that, in other words, it's still up. It's up to the adult child now to do the healing themselves. You can
Yeah,
own, you can own your stuff. You can express remorse from it, and then let it go.
yeah. So can I speak to that?
Please.
Yeah. So a few things. Everything you said, I totally agree with. Um, let me just remember what I was going to say. Okay. So number one, yes. Like you said, if you can't let go of the guilt, and guilt is one of these very adhesive things that it's, someone can say drop it. It can be hard to drop it. It's deeply ingrained. It's in your own nervous system, definitely get a therapist, and or seek, support for that. One of the subtle things that's harder to see is that when you try to help your kids through guilt, like you said, don't try to fix your children or help, don't try to support them from a place of guilt. When you do that, who are you really trying to help?
Yeah.
The feeling of guilt is one of the most intolerable experiences for human beings. It immediately engenders a kind of desperate desire to offload itself,
Yeah.
or a fantasy that someday it'll be offloaded, or a depressive or dejection that it'll never be offloaded, but it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
And when we feel guilty, and yet we haven't separated the remorse, the specific remorse, from the heavy guilt load that we're carrying from wherever, then anytime we try to help or be good or make amends from that place, we're not doing it for the other person most often.
Yeah.
We're trying to pay down the interest on our own debt loan, you know what I'm saying? Our own guilt loan. And you're doing it kind of at the other person's expense. The other person becomes an object to you, and you want to feel better, and you will feel better if your child is doing better. Now, again, you truly do love your child. It's not that you're doing this on purpose either. This is also unconscious. But as long as I think it helps to see that it's completely counterproductive not to do what Gabor's saying, because if you hold on to the guilt and squeeze onto it and tighten your grip on it and try to act from there, A, it's not going to go away, and B, you are achieving the opposite effect of what you are telling yourself you want, which is to help. You're actually you're reinforcing for the child, the adult child, that they can't quite trust you. Because here's the other thing. It's true that you didn't do it on purpose. It's true that you were the conveyor belt. It's true that it didn't start with you. And it's true that your guilt, which tells you you're a bad person and you fucked them up or whatever, is unhelpful and inappropriate. You need to know that so you can let go of your guilt. However, your child, one of the things your adult child is going to have to come to on their own, in their own time, is that you didn't do it to them on purpose.
Yeah.
Because they could not have helped but experience it as you doing it to them. Yeah. Whether on purpose or not. From the child's point of view, there's no other perspective from a child's point of view. Daddy has all the power, daddy has all the knowledge, mommy knows what she's doing, they make the rules, right? So it may take a while. You can't wait for your child to say to you, I forgive you, before you forgive yourself, because it may take them some time to update their own nervous system, right? This is another reason why practically it makes no sense to try and work out your guilt through the child, because you're asking them to do your work for you. And the child can't do that because and when I say the child, we're talking about the adult child. I'll just speak for myself. I'm busy working out my own stuff. I don't have time for your guilt. I'm still trying to sort out what's now from what's then.
Yeah.
So there's a author that I really hold in high esteem talks about how actually the appropriate place for parents to be is completely out of their children's psychological and emotional life at a certain point. Just get out of there. It's not your business. You can love them. You can be concerned like you would be for anybody. But probably one of the violations, one of the things that went wrong in the relationship, and anyone reading this book or watching this live stream, there was a rupture in this relationship at some point. That's just part of the structure of it. But one of those ruptures happened because there was a lack of boundaries. So it's time now in the present moment to start putting them in. And that's not about, if people saw that Jonah Hill debacle, where he wrote this, the actor wrote this kind of self-righteous text to his girlfriend about his boundaries and all the rules of what she has to do. That's not what boundaries are. Boundaries is recognizing you end there and I start over here and we are not the same. And I can't control you and I can't live your life for you and all that stuff. So if you couldn't create healthy boundaries with your kids when they were small, the best thing you can do now is to start to learn them for yourself. Because your guilt will tell you that it'll just have you stay in that fusion state, which doesn't help the relationship, doesn't help you, and it doesn't help them.
How did it feel for you when it came across in a guilty way towards you?
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And it was worse than terrible because it wasn't, it felt like a continued burden.
Yeah.
Like you need something from me. Underneath your guilt, you need me to say something that'll take your guilt away, and I can't do that.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you were guilty before I met you.
Yeah.
But it also very much felt like you're not actually seeing me.
Hmm.
Because even you, I get asked this all the time. It must be so nice to have a father who acknowledges the ways in which he screwed you up or in which your childhood screwed you up, right? That things weren't perfect. And I acknowledge that for many people, that would be a luxury because there's a lot of parents who can't even have any conversation like this. They don't have the vocabulary to talk about themselves. But there's a flip side because your recollection of what happened to me is your recollection of what happened to me.
Yeah.
And it's completely remembered through your own filter and through the filter of your guilt and everything you know and everything you've read about. My experience was my experience. And it was very much my own. And what is trauma? It's a fracturing inside the self, meaning taking your word for it is an echo in some ways of the same dynamic that hurt me in the first place. So what I've needed to do is to get beyond your recollection of my childhood, because your recollection of my childhood fundamentally doesn't help me. You can tell me some facts that might help fill in some blanks, but as you know, healing happens on the experiential level, not on the fact level. No one can give you the information that'll help you heal. And so I've always found it comes up, it leaves me coming up very short when I expect that you acknowledging what happened to me will heal me. It won't.
I just got something, by the way. There are two reasons in general to convey information to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
One is helpful, the other is not. If they ask for it, it's very helpful.
Yes.
So if you ask what was going on for you and your mom when I was 3 years old, or what was happening in our family, or that's because you want to know.
Yep.
It's helpful. If I, however, come and lay that information on you as a way of trying to assuaging or mitigating my own guilt, then I'm just using you.
Did you just say assuage?
Yeah, I did. It's a word.
Assuage. In English, we say assuage. But
Well,
that's
pardon me.
cute.
I'm an immigrant for Europe. Only been in
Continental European. I love it. That's one of
only been in this country 60 years. Don't speak the language very well.
That's one of your cute quirks. I could make a little list of the things even if I was pissed off at you, I'd find that adorable. No, exactly. And Dad, you know how old I was when you first quote unquote laid that on me?
You tell me.
9 or 10.
Yeah, not so good.
Not at my request.
Yeah.
And it was when, and in fact, this is, a great circling around to the question itself. I came to you because I was struggling socially in the schoolyard.
Okay.
And your response to that There's so many things you could have said that would have been super helpful.
Yeah.
One of them would have just been, "That's really hard. I'm sorry."
Yeah.
Another one might have been, "You know what? I remember when I was a kid and I had trouble with bullies.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah." Right? Instead, what you said was, "Yes, well, Daniel, I remember vividly, we were walking in Chinatown in downtown Vancouver, leaving a restaurant, and you said something like, Daniel, it doesn't surprise me that you're having difficulty. You've always had trouble reading social cues, and I think that has to do with sort of the stress in the home when you were growing up, and you're very sensitive." And sort of you explained me to myself
Yeah.
in a way that I'm sure you thought was helpful, but I couldn't do anything with that information at that age.
Yeah.
And I hadn't requested it, which meant that you were, again, superseding a boundary that should have been there.
Yeah.
But don't feel guilty about it. Don't feel guilty about it.
Okay, I won't.
It happened.
But we should maybe take another question or two before we finish for today.
Yeah, we should. By the way, if anyone logged in expecting that you would see, a father and son who have worked everything out perfectly, I hope you have been disabused of that, because that's actually part of what makes this workshop helpful for people, is that they get to see a couple of human beings up here. Although I think we're doing pretty well today. Okay. Someone writing from Ireland says, "I am the mother of 4 adult children. We do not have the close relationship I used to think we would have when they were younger. I divorced my ex-husband many years ago, as he was and still is a chronic alcoholic. Being the child of an alcoholic father myself, I didn't want that for my children. To the best of my knowledge, no abuse happened to them." We understand what she means by abuse, even understanding that trauma takes many forms. "But none of them seem to like me very much sometimes. They seem to hold resentment towards me. I have tried to have conversations with them over the years, but nothing has changed. We do get on," as in get along, I think. "We do see each other, but sometimes not for weeks on end. I feel like I'm on eggshells all the time. One wrong word or an opinion that is different, and all hell can break loose, particularly with my eldest, who's 37. I'm 61, and if we can't fix what is wrong, I'm willing to continue as is. I work long hours, 12-hour shifts, and I don't always have the energy to be calling their houses afterwards. They probably wouldn't want me to, as the grandparents would be in bed." So you're talking about just sort of the practical realities of both being grown-ups and people working and all that. But this thing about, my kids don't seem to like me. I'm walking on eggshells with them. I don't know if it's possible to repair or shore up this relationship. Yeah.
Well, it's the
And
kind
this
of
is
question.
this is very common.
It's very common. It's also very specific in a certain sense that I have to know much more about the family and the person asking the question. But here's what I would begin with. This sense of walking on eggshells. When in your life have you not walked on eggshells? In your childhood, what was it like? I think you said you grew up in an alcoholic home. Is that correct?
That's what she said. Yeah.
Yeah. So in an
And
alcoholic
all
home,
all hell can break loose
yeah,
if something goes wrong.
my sense is that this imperative to walk on eggshells gingerly and carefully, and you've been with that all your life. It's part of your personality, especially with the people that you're close to. And so it may even be that it's your tendency to be somebody who walks on eggshells, who encourages that dynamic in your children. So my question to you is, what would it be like if you learned how to show up confidently with your kids? Not worried about their reactions, not waiting for all hell to break loose if you said or did the wrong thing, or if you adopted the wrong tone or cast the wrong look. What if you didn't live your life so nervously?
Mm-hmm.
Because my sense is that you have. And that gives the kids too much power. And kids don't want that much power. They want you to be the parent. They always did. So I'm not making you wrong here. I'm just saying that this fear of causing trouble, intriguing the other person, probably has been your dynamic all your life. And it probably predated you having kids.
Yeah.
And then if the kid's father was an alcoholic, then you would have had the same sense in your family home as well. So you've trained your kids to relate to a certain kind of mother who walks on eggshells. What if you got out those eggshells? You love your kids, you care for them. What if you just showed up as a loving mother who's not worried about triggering them? Not that you're callous or disregarding of their sensitivities, but who's not always showing up kind of worried about things. That's what I would say to you without knowing more about the situation.
Right. And obviously, that's the kind of work you're going to have to take on away from your kids so that you can bring it to your kids.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? I would only add a couple of things. Yeah. One of the things that guilt wears away at and corrodes and ultimately makes very difficult is curiosity. When you're feeling guilty and you're on eggshells, usually you're certain about something. You know the way they are, you know what you did, you know how they feel, or so you think. You know, and now you're in, guilt is rigid. It's very inflexible. Guilt is very impervious to new evidence, right? Well, your nerves make your children nervous, and they prevent you from asking new kinds of questions or wondering about your kids. I said on a podcast once, it was someone asking me about parenting children. I'm not a parent, but I said, it seems to me that your children should always be mysteries to you. There should be some wonder about you in your relationship with them. But a lot of parents act as if they just know. And when you're walking around with your eggshells and guilty, whatever,
or fearful,
because curiosity is growth, it's expansion, right? And fear is contraction and protection and safety. And we know biologically you can be in growth mode or you can be in protection mode. You can't be in both at the same time. So when you're in your guilt and your fear, you're not actually relating to who's there. And that itself may be what's pissing them off, or not what's pissing them off, but what they just can't deal with anymore because they have kids of their own. What they're stressed out.
Not pissing them off, setting them off.
No, either way, setting them off, And actually, adult kids sometimes decide, I can't afford the energetic output it takes to deal with my parents. And I was speaking to someone just yesterday who said to her mother on Mother's Day, look, this is yours. You're going to have to deal with this. I can no longer take on the stress that you're carrying and you're asking me to, So if you deal with your own, then that'll help your kids relax around you, quite likely. It might also leave some space where you can, in a non-guilty way and curiously ask, I've never really wondered about what it's like for you to deal with me when I'm on eggshells.
Yeah.
You might want to know what it's actually like for them. It won't kill you to find out. The truth will actually be, sunlight is the best disinfectant in these relationships. When you can find the space and the context where you can handle whatever the answer is, giving them the chance to offload that, you might find that there's just not so much to be afraid of.
Yeah.
So there's dealing with your own pre-existing guilt, as Gabor said, and your fear, your pre-existing fear, which clearly comes from your childhood. But there's also looking beyond the fear in this relationship and imagining, well, what would curiosity look like? And what would my child say if I wasn't coming, if I invited them to answer a curious question from a place that wasn't desperate and fearful? What might I hear that I don't already know? And children, it's a really good feeling, actually. And, you asked me earlier, what's it like when you come to me with guilt or whatever, or when you lay stuff on me? We could ask a more positive question, which is, what's it like for the adult children when the parent shows up in a new way that they never have before, which is just kind of calm, attentive, listening, asking a question, and being able to handle whatever I say in response? It's great.
Well, what might I hear if I that I don't already know? I think it's a good theme for this whole project, and it might also be a good theme to end
Yeah.
um, this YouTube live on. Let's just talk a little bit about what to expect in future YouTube lives. We're going to be interviewing people, experts in the field, people also with their own issues. We'll be looking to answer more of your questions, sharing more about what we're finding out as we're writing this book. What else do you want to add to that, Daniel?
I was thinking it might be fun every now and then to find a scene from a really great film or TV show, because there's no books about this, but this
Yeah,
topic is one of the main themes in American popular culture.
yeah. Hmm.
You know, there's this great show called The Bear on FX, which I recommend to you and Mom if you haven't watched it, about a chef in Chicago. Jamie Lee Curtis, who I know is a friend of yours, has an amazing cameo midway through the second season as the mother, and there was a whole episode
Hmm.
about the family dynamic, and
Hmm.
just watching great scenes or reading them from novels or whatever, and just looking at how these characters manifest the things we're talking about, I think could be a fun way into what we're dealing with here, because artists have been wrestling with, I mean, look,
Excellent.
what's the most classic piece of theater of all time? Oedipus Rex, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's about the depth, complexity, difficulty, tragedy of this relationship in many ways.
Well, actually, speaking of Greek tragedy, I'm just reading this great Greek playwright 2,600 years ago, Aeschylus, and I'm reading his trilogy, the Agamemnon trilogy, in which a son ends up killing his father. No, sorry, no, killing his mother.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Does he sleep with his father?
sorry.
Does he sleep with his father? Is it just Oedipus in reverse?
No, it's not the Oedipus story. But it's another multi-generational trauma in a family where kids get affected by their parents' histories. Anyway,
So it turns out that it's not a particularly contemporary problem. It's not. It wasn't
contem-
invented last.
contemporary. No, heck, it goes way back to the Bible.
It goes way, way back, which hopefully, as on a parting note, can set some part of us at ease, which is to say, we didn't. It's very much not personal. It's not just multi-generational in our own families, trauma-wise, but it's a human thing, and it should be. This is a difficult relationship. It's an important relationship. And I think what I'm excited about through this project is to explore how fruitful and rewarding it can be. And if you can't end up having that relationship, either because they're dead or you choose not to be in relationship with them, at least refreshing the relationship with the relationship is really good for your
within
health
your, within yourself.
within yourself. Yeah.
Okay, shall
So
we
we
say
don't,
goodbye?
yeah, we don't know exactly when the next one will be. I would say not for another month at least. But we will put the word out on our social media feeds when it happens, and we hope to get these going, semi-regularly into the fall and as we write the book. And I don't know about you, Deb, but this feels really useful to me as a sort of as some mile markers in the writing process. I find it really useful to wonder about this stuff out loud with you, in front of people.
Absolutely, and I look forward to reading the transcript.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to get it transcribed. All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. And for everyone watching on replay, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel. And yeah, be well. Wishing you all a really happy rest of the summer. And until we talk again.
Thanks, Daniel.
Peace, Dad. Bye.
Bye.